Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
I love how even though we do this every single week, sometimes multiple times a week, we still always kind of forget like how to record. Like where's the button?
Yeah.
I host the Zoom meeting, so I have to like let Courtney record when she's the one editing, and I'm always like, where do I go to do this? And where like we do this. This is our 190th something episode. You think we would have figured this out by now, but apparently not.
Yeah, you would think so. That makes me think 200, I guess, is coming up quickly.
Okay, since we're just doing our pod planning in our intro like we do, I looked the other day. So if we release the week of Christmas, which we usually don't, but if we do, the first episode of 2024 will be 200. But if we skip Christmas, the week of Christmas, then the second episode of January will be 200.
Oof. Oh, that's tough
I
because I
know.
really like the first week of January.
Exactly.
That
It's
would,
so
all right.
like,
Well, you're gonna have an
okay,
episode
we'll find short
every
something
week for the rest of the
forever.
year. Yeah.
Maybe we'll take like a random, like Valentine's Day. We're off this week, guys.
We're off this week. Um, yeah, because it's just
I do like that
exciting.
symmetry too of like, oh, a beautiful like 200 beginning of the year.
Yeah.
It's exciting. We also got to figure out what we're going to do for the 200th episode.
Let us know if you have ideas since you're now a part
Yes.
of our planning session. Because yeah, we should do something fun
Yeah.
for
I
sure.
know, I think for 100 we did like, was that like the funny crimes one? We like humorous things that were like, like people
Maybe.
that like got caught in stupid ways for like bank robberies
Yeah.
and stuff.
I was gonna say we could do our
Sorry,
most heavily
Courtney.
requested case, but I'm like, I don't even know what that is at this point.
Yeah.
Because I feel like most of the ones people request we do. Like
Yeah, I feel like
it's
we've
not
already
like a
done the
multiple people requesting it. So
yeah. It was also funny though, this episode. So I know you really like the People Magazine Investigates, but I've never watched any of them. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna do one of those. So I found one that looked interesting. Literally wasn't until after I had like finished the episode, looked at the other resources, that I realized that I had this on our list and didn't even make the connection.
make the connection.
I'll explain how at the end because there's like a very specific piece of it that like that drew my attention before that I had it saved for. But yeah, didn't even realize until almost the very end. And I was like, oh, this was already on our list. Great. I just killed two birds with one stone. So
Yeah.
I
I know
also had
I
a
actually needed inspiration for the one I'm researching now because I was like, I don't know. Like I had so many lined up that I was like, I'm doing this, this, and this, and this.
mm-hmm.
And then I sat there and was like, what am I doing now? And I actually went and like scrolled through our list of
Mm-hmm.
suggestions and found one off there. So
Yeah.
stay tuned.
Yeah. I like to do that every so often to make sure that we're like getting to those. But then
Hmm.
sometimes, things will happen that spark our interest of, oh, I gotta do this or I heard about this. My dad told me about one today that we got to make sure and cover soon. So I gotta add it to the queue coming up. I also I know this isn't a video podcast, but I just painted my nails and my hand gestures out of the corner of my eye in the Zoom are cracking me up because I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, can't even explain it because again, this is not a
She's just
video.
making sure that her fingers are as far as widespread as they can.
And I have
You
some
look like a
long ass
little
fingers.
kid. You do have long fingers. You look like little Slender Man fingers over there. Have you seen Everything Everywhere All at Once?
No.
Oh, great movie, first off.
Okay.
Second off, I guess this isn't too much of a spoiler, but it's like a time thing, kind of like jumping
Mm-hmm.
through
Okay.
times and worlds and whatever generally. Um, and like there's this one where everyone's fingers are hot dogs.
Are you saying that's what my fingers look like?
Not that extreme, but with how far you're spreading them apart, a little bit.
I really want to like line up hot dogs next to my fingers now and like see how far they
Instead of is
go.
it hot dogs or legs, is it hot dogs or Jacqueline's fingers? Hold on.
Oh my god.
I have to real time everywhere all at once. Hot dog fingers. Oh my gosh. Thank God. I hate how the Google
The Google. But why does that
and like
legit look just like me right
and then like
now?
Literally, that's why I was laughing, because that's what it made me think of. But literally, it was exactly what you were doing.
You were not fucking kidding. Like,
oh man.
wow. Okay, well, I guess we'll have to put that in stories or something so you guys
I
can
know. So
so
you
I need
guys
to
can
like
see.
show you what I look
Also,
like
if you
right
just
now.
Google everything everywhere all at once,
Oh
hot
my
dog
gosh.
fingers, it's like the first picture that comes up. At least for my Google search. I assume everyone else's too, but but
Oh
that's especially
man.
because I can't see your nails from this angle.
Yeah.
So that's what it looked like. Oh my lord.
Oh
Oh,
gosh.
okay.
Normally before we start recording, like we know it's gonna be unhinged, but this one just took us by surprise. It snuck
It
up on
did.
us.
Oh, it really did. Oh man.
But I did have, because I didn't think we were gonna have anything to talk about, and I was sorely mistaken as always. I did have a short, funny story that I wanted to share with you. So a little backstory for everyone else listening that's not Courtney. All five of you know. So our husbands have planned a night for us getting together this week, which is also nice because, unusual for them to get together
Yeah.
and plan something for the group to do. But today Andrew was like, "Have you talked to Courtney lately?" And I was like, I mean, in what context? Because yes, I talk to Courtney all day, every day. Like, about what? And
Yeah,
so just,
about what topic?
yeah, it's just like in his brain, just, have you talked to her lately? Like, I mean, in the
That makes
last
it sound like
45
I'm
seconds?
missing too, or something. Have you talked to Courtney lately? Like, is
I'm like,
she?
is she doing okay? But yeah, he wanted to know about eating, so we could, discuss that later. But that was funny that, have you talked to Courtney lately? I mean, only every single day of my life.
Oh, only every few hours
Yeah,
in
yeah. I'm
some
like,
capacity.
so I was like, in about what? Because yes, I guarantee you I have.
Oh.
Unless Courtney is like
Oh.
on an airplane or somewhere with no cell phone service, then yes, I am probably talking to her.
Yeah, that was like whenever I was on my honeymoon, because Hawaii is like a 6 hour time difference.
Yes. Oh my
And
God.
so like we had like this like 5 hour window where
Yep.
we would talk. And then because I remember the first day I was there, I woke up at like it was like 6 or 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And like I replied to like a text in the group chat and they were like, "You're
Mhm.
finally awake." And I was like, "It's 6 a.m." And I was like, "Oh, it's noon."
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
1 p.m. for them.
And literally like
So
all day. And I'm just like, okay, is she awake yet? Nope, nope, she's not awake. Okay.
nope, nope, nope.
And then as soon
Yeah.
as you get awake and we have a good conversation, it's like, okay, we're going to bed. See you
Yeah, I
tomorrow.
know.
Enjoy the rest
I
of
know.
your
Then at
full
like
day.
3 p.m., you guys are going to bed. So it's like,
Yep.
okay,
Yeah.
well.
Oh boy. Okay. I guess we need to
Yeah, let's go
get
ahead
a
and get
move
into this
on.
episode. We don't have any updates. I'm sure there's some in the world. I just don't know them.
Yeah.
And if you ever see updates like throughout your week, just send them to us because we're about a
Please
week ahead
do.
on recording. So
Mm-hmm.
we can usually get them pretty timely
Yeah.
these days. So just let us know if you see anything that's like crazy interesting.
Help your girls out because
Yeah,
it's hard sometimes. There's too much out
it
there
is.
and it's just kind of
Yeah.
bombarding.
So our sources for this week are a People Magazine Investigates episode, season 7, episode 11, the Times Square Killer, a Rolling Stone article, a Project Cold Case article, a few articles from the New York Post, and an article from Pix 11. So, a serial killer spent over a decade murdering young women in and around New Jersey and New York due to multiple police jurisdictions and limited forensic capabilities at the time. He got away with it for many years and took many lives before he was caught. So, on July 17th, 1968, 13-year-old Jackie Harp left her home to attend color guard practice. She was actually a flag carrier for the Imperial Knights Drum and Bugle Corps, and Jackie had 4 older sisters named Clara, Dottie, Kathy, and Susan. Jackie was described as fun, independent, full of life, bubbly, and she had a great sense of humor. Friends and family say she found something happy in everything, and she wanted to be like her older sisters, but also found her own interests through color guard. So the family grew up in Midland Park, New Jersey, in Bergen County, which, fun fact, my husband was actually also born in Bergen County. And then when I was reading through the notes, every city, I was like, have you heard of this one? Have you heard of this one? Have you heard of this one? And he did get excited about one of them, and I'll
Oh.
mention which one when we get to it.
I also wanted to chime in that I learned this fact about Kevin approximately 20 minutes before we started recording when Courtney was reading the notes for the first time and texted me about them. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I was like, is Dumont going to pop up? Probably not because it's so small. But
well, she was texting me to be like, hey, you're a fucking moron. This is wrong.
I was like, I don't know if this geography is right.
But I do what I do. Okay.
New York, New Jersey, it's confusing. There's a lot going on. Okay.
Yeah. Especially in this one, that there's so many names, there's so many cities, there's so much happening. It's a lot to wrap my
There's so
brain
many
around.
cities in Bergen County because Bergen County is so big.
Yeah.
Like also.
Yeah. I learned that throughout this.
Yeah. So it was a typical small town in the 60s. There was approximately 8,000 people. Everyone felt safe and no one locked their doors. I feel like I hear my mother-in-law say that about Dumont all the time, where she's just like, oh, our kids just ran around, did whatever. It was small town living.
Yep.
So that July night, Jackie practiced with the color guard in a local barn, and several people offered to give her a ride home, but she declined, said she just wanted to walk. And Jackie's older sister, Susan, arrived home from hanging out with her friends around 9 p.m., and Jackie wasn't home yet. So their mom started to worry and went around town looking for her, and after having no luck finding her, they reported her missing to the police that night. It wasn't long before police informed Jackie's family that her body had actually been found in a brook. So there were bruises and marks on her neck, and it was later determined that Jackie had been strangled with the sling of her color guard uniform. So police interviewed everyone in the small town, but they didn't really uncover any credible leads. So everyone started to suspect each other, and there was soon a lot of distrust in the town. So over the next couple of years, there were another 8 unsolved murders of young women, and police believed the same man killed all of them, and they started referring to him as the Bergen Strangler. So all of the women had ligature marks on their necks and were bound by their wrists. On April 8th, 1969, 18-year-old Irene Blaze was found in Saddle River in Saddlebrook, New Jersey. She'd been strangled with a necklace she was wearing. And on July 14th, 1969, 15-year-old Denise Velasca was found outside of a cemetery. She left home alone on July 13th and planned to hitchhike into town. She was seen getting into a car around 9 p.m., and when she was found, she'd been strangled with the necklace she was wearing. Which I guess I never really thought about being able to be strangled with a necklace. I would think it would break. Yeah. But that's crazy that it can hold.
Yeah, that
was crazy.
That's the thing. You think if you pull on it hard enough that it would just snap, but I guess. And also, this was the 60s, so maybe things were just made better than maybe
true.
Maybe that
they
wouldn't
didn't have as much
today.
Consumerism.
Yeah, I legit wonder if that's part of it. Because you would think with enough force to strangle someone that it would break before that point. Yeah.
So years go by and police still don't have any answers about the Bergen County murders. So then a series of murders started in other areas of New Jersey. And on December 15th, 1977, 26-year-old Marianne Carr didn't show up to a scheduled dinner with her mother-in-law in Little Ferry, New Jersey, and her mother-in-law grew concerned. So Marianne and Michael Carr had only been married for a year and a half. So Marianne was pretty, sweet, outgoing, and her parents just adored her. She worked as a medical technician, and Michael was a real estate executive. So Michael had left for a business trip to Rochester, New York on December 9th, and he was supposed to be gone for several days. Marianne went to work on December 15th, and she had plans to have dinner at her mother-in-law's house after, but she never showed up. So her mother-in-law called her several times, but there was no answer. And at 11:45, she called her nephew, who lived in the same apartment complex as Marianne and Michael. So the Ledgewood Terrace apartments consisted of separate apartment buildings that required a key to enter, and then the individual key for the apartments. I'm saying this weird. Hold on.
I don't feel like when I wrote this sentence, I kept trying and I don't know why I had such a hard time trying to explain this concept, but it's you would
have
picture
a key to get in the building, and then you have a key to your apartment.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I was
Yeah.
getting lost in my words too. I don't know why. I'm like, why am I just like fumbling around like an idiot over here?
I think what confused me that I was trying to explain is like you have like your typical apartment building where you like go in like the main front door that you have to have access to, and then you have like your individual apartments. But these were also like a set of apartments. So like within the same apartment complex, like you would have like building A, you have to enter in the door, and then you have the 10 apartments, whatever. Building B,
hmm
you have to enter in the main door.
And
You have
like
like the 10
A,
apartment.
B, C all have different keys. So like
Exactly.
A key won't work at B building. Yeah.
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I was trying to explain here that
Yeah.
I did not write very well. So I'll take the blame for that.
Well, I
And
should have read
also,
through this and knew what I was talking about. And here I am just like on the fly being like, why can't I say a sentence?
just look
So
at this graciousness where I'm just like, no, it's my fault. And you're like, no, 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 it's my fault.
don't blame me. I take the blame. Okay, so now that you have an idea of what this apartment complex looks like, the nephew
Now
had
that
an
you have just
extra.
completely stopped listening because you're like, what
Yeah,
is
I know.
wrong with
You're
you
like, this
all?
is too unhinged for me, and you guys are not taking this seriously, and this is serious. We're trying, okay?
Yes, we're
We're
just
trying.
words are hard. We're trying to explain
Words
things
are
so you
hard.
can get a visual. But yes,
Yes.
we are serious now.
So the nephew that Marianne's mother-in-law called did have an extra key to Marianne and Michael's apartment building that they had given him, so he was able to get inside their building where he found their front door unlocked. So he looked inside the apartment and saw that the kitchen, bedroom, and living room lights were on, but there was no sign of Marianne, and things just seemed off. So he just immediately called the police. He also contacted Michael, who said he would fly back first thing in the morning. And before Michael made it back, police received a call of a body found in the parking lot of the Quality Inn on Route 17 South in Hasbrook Heights at 7:15 a.m. So when detectives arrived on the scene, they saw a body of a white female wearing what appeared to be a nurse's uniform. And she was quickly identified as Marianne Carr. She was still wearing her work uniform from the day before. And detectives canvassed the parking lot and the hotel, but they weren't able to find anything. And when they went to Marianne's apartment, they found a glass of wine on the kitchen counter and mail on the kitchen table, but nothing to indicate that like a struggle took place. So it looks like she got home from work, turned on the lights, put the mail down, poured herself a glass of wine. But because there's no signs of a break in, they believed that someone had a key to her building and was able to force their way inside her actual apartment. And again, it's also the 60s, so it's possible maybe she didn't lock her front door because you have to have a key to get into the building. So
Yeah.
there's also that possibility.
And like she had just gotten home from work too. I mean, I feel like now a lot of people immediately lock their door as soon as you come in, but I also feel like it's not unusual to not, like while you're just like home,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, come in and then, go about your
Especially
business,
if she was about
whatever.
to leave too. So she's
Yeah,
like, oh, I'm coming in, I'll get a little bit of wine, get changed, leave.
exactly.
So Marian's autopsy showed that she was strangled to death, likely from the chain she wore around her neck. She'd also been brutally beaten and shackled with handcuffs, and there was a white adhesive residue on her mouth, and they believed her mouth had been taped prior to her death. So detectives started interviewing other residents of the apartment building, and one neighbor did hear a woman screaming around 7:45 and then saying, "I will, I will." She thought it was coming from the direction of Marianne's apartment, and a couple of other residents saw Marianne in the parking lot of the apartment complex at approximately 7:30 p.m., speaking to a white male that they thought was her husband. Obviously, Michael was already on their suspect list, so detectives interviewed him as quickly as possible, but they were easily able to verify that Michael had been out of town since December 9th and could not have, done anything, had anything to do with Marianne's death. Like he's on a different side of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So during the investigation, detectives learned that another resident of the apartment complex had their apartment broken into the month before. So his leather jacket, suits, and a watch were taken. It appeared like a typical burglary, but the door wasn't damaged. So they believe someone had access to the building. Like, that's who broke in. And Marianne was buried in her wedding dress, and her father was so distraught that he had a heart attack during her funeral after seeing her body. He did survive, but obviously her entire family was devastated.
Which
Just
I
so
feel
sad.
like, yeah, I feel like that's just another example. Like, in these cases, when you think about who the victims are and just like how far reaching something like this is, like there's so many
Mm-hmm.
people who are impacted when someone does something like this. And it's like this poor man literally had a heart attack because he saw the state of his daughter after she had been murdered by
Mm-hmm.
someone. And it's just like this domino effect that so many lives are ruined
Yeah.
because of this.
Yeah. And on May 5th, 1980, a maid was cleaning room 132 at the same Quality Inn where Marianne was found when her vacuum hit something under the bed. And when she went to check it out, she found the body of a young woman. She had been strangled, and marks on her breasts indicated that she'd been tortured. She was also wearing handcuffs, and detectives searched the room for any clues, and they were able to get a fingerprint from the handcuffs. The body was able to be identified as 19-year-old Valerie Ann Street. She was a sex worker and had been strangled either by a ligature or the necklace she was wearing. And detectives learned that Valerie had last been seen that morning around 1 a.m., getting into the car of a man with sandy blonde hair. And friends had seen her earlier that evening around 10 p.m. working on a street in Manhattan. So, because both bodies were found at the same Quality Inn and both women had been strangled, detectives believe they are connected and start looking into other nearby open cases. So, they find another case that makes them suspicious that they may have a serial predator on their hands. So, on March 23rd, 1978, a young woman was found in the parking lot of the Ledgewood Terrace apartments at 7 a.m. These are, again, the apartments where Marianne had lived. We went through the whole description of the buildings and how you get into them. Same apartments.
Yeah, I don't think you needed the reminder the second time since we talked about it so extensively the first time. But since that was
Yeah.
not planned, wanted to throw that little, just in case you forgot the name,
Just
because
in
I didn't
case.
think it would be a thing.
Yeah. um, so her body was covered in bruises and her breast had been pinched and scratched. And her name was Karen Schilt. She was a 22-year-old waitress and she actually survived the attack. So Karen told detectives she was in New York City when she was approached by a white male who identified himself as John. And Karen went to the bathroom, and when she came back, the man had bought her a drink. So she soon started getting dizzy, and she kind of suspected she'd been drugged. So Karen passed out, and when she woke up, she was in a strange car in the parking lot of the Ledgewood Terrace apartments with the man from the bar. He told her he once lived there, and the man then raped Karen, stole her money and jewelry, and threw her out of the car. So, 7 months after Karen's attack, Susan Geiger was raped, beaten, and left for dead at an airport motel in South Hackensack, New Jersey. Luckily, she survived and was able to describe her attacker. She described a white male in his 30s that also seemed to match Karen's attacker. So, detectives do believe the same man was responsible for all of these attacks. And on December 2nd, 1979, firefighters are called to a hotel fire at the Travel Inn Motor Lodge in New York City. And after they put out the fire, they discovered the bodies of two 19-year-old women. One woman was on each bed, and both beds had been intentionally set on fire. So both women were sex workers, and their bodies showed obvious signs of torture prior to their death. They were covered in cuts, and their heads and hands had been removed and were not found. Because the bodies had been set on fire with lighter fluid, it wasn't possible to get any forensics. And police believe they're dealing with a sexual sadist because, yikes, this is getting extreme.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Everything appeared very organized, and detectives believe that the killer who did this had killed before, but there weren't any other New York City murders to compare them to. So one woman was identified as 22-year-old Dita Gudarazzi. Gudarzi. I'm really sorry. Oh, sorry. And the other has never been identified, and she's referred to as Manhattan Jane Doe. And on May 15th, 1980, firemen responded to a fire at the Seville Hotel in Bergen County, New Jersey. And they did find the body of Jean Rayner inside. She was a sex worker, and her body had been severely mutilated, including her breasts being severed. And just a few days later, on May 22nd, 1980, police receive another call from the same Quality Inn where two women have previously been found dead. An employee heard a woman screaming in room 117, and he called the room to make sure everything was okay. And a man answered and said he and his girlfriend were just fooling around, which I'm like, Sir, what?
Why is she screaming?
Yeah. What? I don't know if that sounds like happy screams, but um, so the hotel employee was still suspicious, so he knocked on the room door and a young woman answered it. He could only see her head and face, and she said yes, that everything was okay, but she did appear distressed and was motioning to the side with her eyes, kind of indicating like everything was not okay, kind of being like, yeah, everything's fine. Like, somebody please help me.
Yeah.
So the employee immediately calls police, who arrive quickly. And when the Hasbrook Heights Police Department get there, they see a man leaving room 117. So they call out to him and he takes off running. A police officer meets him on the other side of the hallway with a shotgun and tells him to freeze. So the man does freeze and drops his bag. Inside the bag, they find handcuffs, tape, sexual collars, a knife, liquor, and a starter pistol. So the man's taken to the police station where he's interviewed and fingerprinted. So this man is 34-year-old Richard Cottingham from Lodi, New Jersey. Just wrapping it back, whenever Kevin was excited about hearing a town, it was Lodi.
Of
As
course it
soon
was
as
that one, Kevin.
of course it was. I was like, Lodi, and he was like, I was waiting for you to say Lodi. I used to play them in football all the time. So he was waiting on that one. I was like, oh, great. The one with the not so
Oh,
great guy. Cool.
that's the one. Okay,
Cool.
great job, Kevin.
Good. So Richard is a married father of 3 children, working as a computer operator for Blue Cross Blue Shield in Midtown Manhattan. He tells police he met a sex worker from New York and arranged to pay her $180 for sex before taking her to the Quality Inn, which I'm like, in the 80s, I feel like that's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
So the woman identified herself as 18-year-old Leslie Ann Odell, and she confirms that he picked her up for sex and took her to the Quality Inn. She said she was okay with most of what he wanted, but then he handcuffed her behind her back and then handcuffed her ankles together and started cutting her with a knife. He then sodomized her, cut up her breast, and threatened to beat her with his belt. He told her he was a murderer for hire and showed her his gun. He also called her a whore and said he would kill her, and that's what he does to whores. He tried to smother her, but she was able to slip away, and that's when she screamed and was heard by the hotel employee. So obviously she's like, this guy took it way far, way too far.
But also just like how amazing that she was able to get away long enough to scream, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, that someone heard her scream. Number three, that someone actually did something, because I feel like so many times in these cases, they're like, oh, like we heard screaming, but like we know what kind of place this is. We know what people are doing. We just but like that employee was like, no, something is wrong, called, still wasn't sure, went to the door and then was like, okay, I know something's not right, and called police.
And called the police. Yeah.
Just incredibly amazing that those 3 things were able to happen to lead to the arrest of this guy.
And I wonder if it changed at all that like 2 women have been found dead at this hotel before.
Yeah.
Like if maybe the guy's like, I feel some, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
especially like heightened, like hopefully he would have like done something either way, but especially heightened when you're like 2 people have already been found dead here. Like,
maybe I should be extra aware of my surroundings.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So when detectives interview Richard, he starts crying and then tells them he would have to be crazy to tell the police what he's been up to. They asked him if he had a problem with women, and he said he did, but wasn't willing to admit anything else. So detectives obtain a search warrant for his home in New Jersey. His wife, Janet, opened the door and told them she had recently filed for divorce for cruelty and abandonment. She told detectives about a locked room in the basement that only Richard is allowed in. And they found a safe in the basement and got a locksmith to open it. Inside, they found weapons he'd used and trophies from the women he'd assaulted and killed, including Karen and Susan's jewelry and Valerie's pin. They also found a key stamped 462C that matched the outside door of the Ledgewood Terrace apartments. So Richard told police he rented an apartment at Ledgewood Terrace around May of 1970, but they discovered that he lived in a different building than the one they had the key to. So they also discovered that Richard worked with a man named John Van Soest, who lived above Marianne Carr. So John was actually the man who was robbed prior to Marianne's death. So John was shocked when he found out that Richard had been arrested, but they discovered that Richard had stolen John's keys from work with the intention of robbing him. So this is how he was able to rob John without obvious signs of a break-in, and how he was able to get to Marianne's door. So John's watch was found with the other trophies. They found a necklace and complete set of clothing that was Jean and Rayner's. So police are now putting together that Richard Cottingham is responsible for murders in both New Jersey and New York. And there's also other trophies that belong to unknown women. So they realize he's killed many more times than they even know. Like there's a lot of, they already knew a lot, but there's still a lot they need to find out. So 2 of the surviving kidnap and assault victims were brought in to do a lineup, and both positively identified Cottingham, and a fingerprint taken from the handcuffs on Valerie Street's body was also a match to Cottingham.
Cottingham's first trial began in 1981. The prosecution did not want to include all of his crimes in one trial so that they had more opportunities in case he was acquitted. So, obviously double jeopardy, like they couldn't try him twice. So they're like, we're going to kind of break this up a little bit just to be on the safe side. So his first trial was for the kidnappings of Karen Schilt, Susan Geiger, Leslie Odell, and an unidentified woman. So the prosecution offered Cottingham a plea deal of 20 years, and his attorney knew how damning the evidence was against him and was like, you should take the deal, but Cottingham declined and said he wanted to go to trial. So the victims took the stand and publicly identified Cottingham as the man who kidnapped, raped, and beat them. And they were also able to describe their jewelry that was found in his safe. And then they did positively identify it when the prosecution brought it out. They were like, yes, that is mine. So Cottingham tried to say that his relationship with Leslie was consensual and that he paid to cut her up. So he's trying to say like, oh yeah, like this is what, like she knew what she was getting into. Like I paid to be able to do this. But he did try to deny knowing the other 3 women, but clearly his testimony was not very convincing because the jury did find him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 200 years in prison. So again, just trial number 1, just for the kidnapping. Like those weren't even murders that he was sentenced for.
This was, his attorney was right. He should have taken the deal.
So his second trial was for the murder of Marianne Carr, and the physician who examined both Marianne Carr and Valerie Street's bodies believed that it was the same killer because there were like so many similarities. Both had handcuffs on the body, leftover adhesive from tape, and both had died by manual strangulation. John Van Soest was called to testify about his keys being stolen while at work, which led to Cottingham having the means to access Marianne's apartment. And Cottingham was also found guilty of the murder of Marianne Carr and sentenced to life in prison to run consecutively to his previous sentence of 200 years. So they're not even giving him a concurrent, like they're like, no, we're stacking these. Like
we're stacking. Yeah.
I also read somewhere that Valerie Ann Street was also tried at the same time as Marianne Carr, but it was only in one place and I couldn't really find it anywhere else. And there wasn't any details about her specifically in the trial if it was. So just wanted to put that out there that she may have been included in that trial, but I'm also not positive. But we do know that he definitively killed her. I mean, there's no doubting that.
Yeah.
In July of 1984, Cottingham was tried and convicted for the murders of Dita Guzari, Manhattan Jane Doe, and Jean Rayner. So obviously detectives now know that they do have Richard Cottingham in prison forever. So like we don't have to worry about him going anywhere. But they do wonder if he's also responsible for a series of unsolved murders in the surrounding areas. So like clearly like this was not his first time doing any of this. So they started questioning him to see if he would confess, and he was like, you didn't go back far enough. And he tells them that his first murder was in 1967. So he tells detectives that he strangled her with her own pantyhose, but he wouldn't give up her name. But local detectives did remember the unsolved murder of Nancy Vogel from that year. So Nancy was a 29-year-old mom to 2 young children who went out to play bingo on October 31st, 1967. She never came home and was later found murdered in the backseat of her car. Her hands were bound, she had been raped and then strangled. So Cottingham confessed to murdering around 80 women, but he wouldn't give detectives any names or details, but they start looking into other open cases in Bergen County. So if you remember from the beginning of the episode, like Courtney talked about, there had been a series of murders in Bergen County in the 60s and 70s that they believed had been carried out by the same man. So police now think that Richard Cottingham is the Bergen Strangler, just because of all the similarities, the location,
Mm-hmm.
So Cottingham told police his interest in pornography started at a young age and that he then needed to escalate his sexual fantasies into activities like bondage and S&M. He said that he then had to escalate to killing women to get that sexual satisfaction. That's really hard to say. So sexual sadism is believed to get worse with each experience. So it just kind of is known to escalate. And detectives asked him how it was possible for him to dismember and set a body on fire. And he said, once they're dead, they don't feel anything.
Ugh.
So, yeah. Yeah. He also said, once you kill someone, every person you kill after that is easy. Like, just literally no remorse whatsoever.
Yeah, none at all.
And he also said that he never thought about them after he killed them. So he wouldn't admit to any other murders at this time, but police, again, believe they've caught the Bergen Strangler. So in 2003, Jennifer Weiss was searching for her birth mother after being put up for adoption as a baby. And she was devastated to learn that her mother, Dita Guzari, had been brutally murdered by Richard Cottingham. So she made the decision to visit him in prison because she wanted to meet the man who had murdered her birth mother. She knew that he had answers about her mother that she had always wanted, and after losing both of her adoptive parents, she decided that it was time. And after meeting with him, she realized that she wasn't scared of this man. He was older at this point. She's like, I'm not afraid of you.
Mm-hmm.
And she also just wanted to help others get closure. She was finally able to piece together that Dita grew up in Kuwait and relocated to New York with her father at the age of 14, and she then joined the sex trade. Unfortunately, little is known about the rest of her life up until Cottingham picked her up. But Jennifer did make it her mission to continue a relationship with Cottingham to see if he would admit to other unsolved murders in the area. So she's visiting him, writing him, they had this interesting relationship,
Mm-hmm.
which, going back to the very beginning of the episode, that's what I had saved in our list of things to cover, was an article about this woman talking to this man. And I was like, who the hell is this serial killer? I've never heard of him. And still obviously did not remember him when I started watching this People Investigates episode. So
yeah,
that's how all this ties in together. So in 2006, Richard Cottingham was caught taking bets in prison and sent to solitary confinement. So they're like, okay, this is our chance to get more information out of him. We finally have something that he wants, so we have a little bit of leverage here. So Detective Ancelotti tried to build a relationship with him. He would go play cards with him, talk to him for years, trying to get him to open up about other murders that he had committed. Just he was really into, he was really committed to this whole, I don't want to say charade, but getting to know this man to get him to open up and because they're we know he's done more than this and we want to get closure for these families.
Yeah.
So in 2010, Cottingham finally confessed to the murder of Nancy Vogel. So he said in October of 1967, he met Nancy at a bar in Little Ferry, New Jersey. They left the bar together and he drove her vehicle to Ridgefield Park where he parked and then bound her wrists and raped her in the back seat. He said they were there for about 4 hours and Nancy just kept getting more scared as time passed. And eventually he strangled her with her own pantyhose and left her in the back seat of her car. He did describe her underwear and said there were groceries in the trunk of the car. And Nancy was supposed to be grocery shopping that night, but that information hadn't been publicized and neither had the kind of underwear she was wearing that night. But Cottingham did describe it perfectly. So okay, we know we have the right guy. He was charged with Nancy's murder and pleaded guilty. And Richard was worried about the publicity and asked Ancelotti to keep it quiet. And he actually did his best. He arranged for an after-hours court date with no press. He was trying to honor his wishes, again, to try to keep him talking about other murders.
Yeah, because you want to stay on his good side to get closure for other people and not burn that bridge completely.
Yeah, exactly. But this was a huge case and obviously it still made the newspapers, and Cottingham was very upset that his family would know that he murdered another woman, and so he refused to talk to Ancelotti for 18 months after that. Which I feel goes back to, we see this so many times with serial killers and their weird morals of oh, I'm fine raping and killing women, but I don't want my family to know that I'm a bad guy.
Yeah.
So that upsets me. I have no remorse for killing them, but I don't want my family upset. Like,
It's all about
what?
keeping up that facade. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh, well, you can try and like not justify it, but like downplay it, I guess, and be
Yeah.
like, oh, well, it just, I don't know what happened. But then when it's like, oh, yeah, like I'm just keep adding more and more people, they're like, yeah, okay, now they're going to see
Yeah.
who I really am.
Exactly. So when he did finally start talking again, he confessed to the murder of Irene Blaze in 1969. He said he saw her at a Sears department store buying a scarf and he asked her to get a drink. She hesitated, but then said okay. She got into his car, but started getting upset when he started driving in the wrong direction. So he pulled the car over and tied her hands behind her back with her new scarf. He raped and strangled Irene and dumped her body in the Saddle River. Cottingham also told police that he was looking for an opportunity every night. Like he was just out looking for a chance, looking for women who were alone, like what he thought was an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for him. And he's like, I just kept getting away with it. And police never like came around asking me any questions, obviously had not tied me to them in any way. So I just kept doing it, is what he said. He then admitted to picking up Denise Velasca and asking her if she wanted a ride. He said he raped her, strangled her, and dumped her body close to Irene's body. And finally, in November of 2017, Cottingham admitted to killing Jackie Harp. He said he pulled up and he asked her if she wanted a ride, but she refused to come close to the car. He then pulled over and got out of the car and walked toward her. And there were cars coming in the opposite direction, and he didn't want anyone to see him, like in the headlights. So he grabbed her and pulled her like into the dark off the side of the road. She fought and he panicked and killed her. And since Cottingham had finally confessed, the belongings Jackie had on her the night she died were finally returned to her sister 55 years after her death.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
just 55 years without having any answers as to who murdered your baby sister.
Yeah. And especially probably when this guy's found, you're like, it could be him. It
Yeah.
could be him, like we think he's the Bergen Strangler. And I mean, it still took, when was his first trial?
In 81.
So even after those trials until 2017 to finally admit to
Exactly.
this one too.
Yeah. In 2021, Detective Ancelotti went to Cottingham and told him he was retiring. So Cottingham was worried about losing his lifeline to the outside world, so he told Ancelotti he wanted to give him a parting gift, which just gross. Just like the way that you're just like, yeah, I'll do you a favor. Here you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ugh. But Cottingham then confessed to the murders of Lorraine Kelly and Marianne Pryor. He said he picked them up as hitchhikers in August of 1974, took them to a hotel, tied them up, raped them, and drowned them in the bathtub. Their bodies were found at a construction site in Montvale. Cottingham was charged with those murders and pleaded guilty. So, Richard Cottingham's first conviction in 1981 obviously did not require a DNA sample, but when he pleaded guilty to the other murders in 2005, he was then required to give a DNA sample. But it would be 17 years after that before the DNA sample would tie him to another murder. So, back up a little bit. On February 15th, 1968, 23-year-old Diane Cusick went to the mall to buy shoes for an upcoming dance show. Diane had recently separated from her husband, and she and her 3-year-old daughter, Darlene, were living with her parents in Hyde Park. She was a dance instructor, and she went to work like normal that day, then came home and said she needed to go to the mall to buy new shoes. She did ask her mom to go with her, but her daughter, Darlene, was sick, so her mom stayed home with her. So it just kept getting later and later, and like to the point where the mall had closed and Diane still wasn't coming back. So they're like, something's wrong. So they decided to drive to the mall to see if they could find her. So her parents found her car in the parking lot, and when they looked inside, they were horrified to find the body of their daughter. She had tape over her mouth and nose. Her father got her out and carried her to the highway, like yelling for help, but it was already too late. And detectives were never able to find who was responsible for Diane's murder. But then in 2003, Diane's daughter, Darlene, wrote to the Nassau County Police Department and asked if they would reopen the case. So they knew that she had been raped and her dress and pantyhose were preserved as evidence, so they sent it off for DNA testing. Unfortunately, the sample wasn't big enough for a full profile, so it did come back with no matches. And as Detective Anzalotti is preparing for retirement, he starts looking at cold cases in the area that did have DNA evidence to see if Cottingham could be like tied to any other murders. So they had Diane's pantyhose tested again, and because of new and updated DNA technology, it did come back in January 2022 as a match to Richard Cottingham. Detectives threatened to send him to Nassau County to press charges, but by that point he was old and sick and he didn't want to leave the prison that he had grown comfortable in, so he agreed to confess and tell them about other murders if they let him stay where he was. And he did admit to 4 other murders that occurred between 1972 and 1973, but he didn't admit to 8 other murders that they suspected he was responsible for.
How do you, when you kill this much, even remember? I mean, obviously killing someone, I feel like you would remember, but like as he's saying, he's like, I don't think about him anymore. And it's so easy and you move on. Like for me, obviously, if I killed someone, I would never forget it. But when you're killing like this many women, it's like, how are
And
you
the
even remembering?
details, yeah, like the details that he remembers, like that Nancy had been grocery shopping and what her underwear looked like
Yeah.
50 years later. Yeah,
It's insane to me.
yeah.
It obviously shows like he still like relives those moments in his head.
Yeah.
Like he obviously is a sexual sadist, but he's like reliving those moments in his head to remember these details.
Yeah. And I also don't know if it's still true, but one of the articles that I read at the time that it was written, Diane Cusick's murder was the oldest to be solved by DNA. Again, that was in 1968. So like Golden State Killer, was like 70s and everything. So that may not be true anymore, but if it's not the oldest, it's one of the oldest that was able to be, I mean, and for DNA evidence to be preserved from 1968 to 2022 is wild.
Yeah. And how they tested it and then tested it a few years later and they're able to get more because DNA technology just keeps evolving and it's incredible.
Yeah. Paul Holes mentioned that at CrimeCon, I think. He mentioned it somewhere. I think it was at a CrimeCon.
Yeah, it was CrimeCon.
Okay. I was like, I know it was him. I just can't place the setting. All the times I spoken to this man.
You stalk him around the world.
No, I couldn't remember if it was his podcast or at CrimeCon. But he did talk about how even if it's only been 5 years, they're like, no, retest it if you have enough because it keeps advancing so rapidly that something that 5 years ago wouldn't get a match may be able to today. Okay, so back to Cottingham admitted to these 4 other murders. So on May 5th, 1972, 21-year-old Mary Beth Hines was working as a live-in nanny for a family in Belmore, New York during the week and would take the bus home to see her family in Mineola, New York during the weekends. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I'm sorry. That night she was supposed to go to a dance, but she never returned. So she did have epilepsy and was unable to drive herself. And this is also like an additional concern that she didn't show up because she had epilepsy. Like, did she have a seizure? Was she unconscious somewhere? So her mom called the Nassau County Police Department when she didn't return that night, but they said there was nothing they could do because Mary Beth was an adult, which again, she has epilepsy. The fact that there's
like a medical reason that she could be in danger. Ugh.
Exactly. And unfortunately, her body was found in a creek in Rockville Center, New York, 5 days after she disappeared. She had been strangled and had abrasions on her face and neck. And eventually the case went cold and Mary Beth's family never knew who killed her. So Mary Beth loved Elvis Presley, arts and crafts, and was in Girl Scouts as a child. She was one of 7 children and loved playing outside. She loved to play dress up as a child. And as she got older, she still really enjoyed just like dressing herself up, like doing her hair and makeup, like, just kind of doing all the glam, And after 50 years, her family finally found out that Cottingham had been responsible for Mary Beth's death. 22-year-old Laverne Moy was found close to where Mary Beth's body was on July 20th, 1972. She had 2 young children who had to grow up without their mother. And after 50 years, they learned that Cottingham had murdered their mother and thrown her off a bridge. 33-year-old Sheila Hyman was beaten to death in her home in North Woodmere, New York in July of 1973. She had 3 children, and her husband found her when he returned home from shopping. And again, Cottingham confessed to her murder as well. 5 months later, the body of 18-year-old Maria Emerita Rosado Nieves was found covered in trash bags and wrapped in a gray blanket. And again, Cottingham confessed to her murder. So on December 5th, 2022, Cottingham confessed to murdering Diane Cusick via video monitor from his hospital room in open court. He was sentenced to an additional 25 years to life in prison, and the prosecution agreed not to charge him for the murders of Mary Beth Hines, Laverne Moy, Sheila Hyman, and Maria Emerita Rosado Nieves, as long as he confessed to them in open court for the public record. So they didn't get the justice of like him being prosecuted, but some of the family members were able to be present and at least see their loved one's killer confess and at least know for sure what happened to them.
Didn't that happen in, was it Golden State Killer, where he
I
took a
think
plea deal,
so.
but like part of the plea deal is like he had to admit to everything he did, like writing it down, or maybe it was like because the rapes had hit the statute of limitations, he had to like say that there was some condition where like he had to say it as part of it to be like, we're putting this in open record so you can get a little bit, closure is the shittiest word, but like a little bit of like somewhere written down public record of who killed them.
Exactly. Information surrounding this next case like isn't really clear, but it does appear that Cottingham also confessed to the murder of Lorraine Montalvo McGraw. So Lorraine was found by hikers in the woods on March 1st, 1970. She did have 2 young children, and her granddaughter would go on to write to Cottingham, who didn't confess to her, but he did say he knew what happened to Lorraine, and supposedly he later confessed to Lorraine's murder to police. So again, like there's kind of some conflicting information about that one, so I'm not positive, but did want to include her name as a murder victim and likely one of Cottingham's. In March of 2023, so just like 6-ish months ago, 7, 8, at the time of this recording, 8. This year, anyway, Cottingham confessed to the murder of Marianne Della Sala in 1967. Marianne was 17 years old and disappeared after working her shift at the ShopRite on Essex Street in Hackensack on January 24th, 1967. Her body was found in the Passaic River 3 months later. This may be Cottingham's first murder because he hasn't confessed or been definitively linked to any murders prior to 1967. Obviously, we don't know for sure, but that is the first one, the earliest one that he has confessed to. Richard Cottingham remains in the New Jersey State Prison today, where he will live for the rest of his life.
And like, how many more is he going to confess to before he dies?
Exactly.
Like, I mean, we have one this year. Yeah. Man's been in prison for 40 years.
Yeah. 42. Yeah.
Yeah, 42 years, and he's still confessing. So might get some updates in the future of more confessions.
Yeah, I know he has killed more, and then it's just a matter of will he admit to them at this point, or will any other DNA evidence, genealogy DNA, any of that link him to other murders? Yeah. So those are the very tragic murders of Jackie Harp, Irene Blaze, Denise Velasca, Marianne Carr, Valerie Ann Street, Dita Gudari, Manhattan Jane Doe, Jean Rayner, Nancy Vogel, Lorraine Kelly, Mary Ann Pryor, Diane Cusick, Mary Beth Hines, Laverne Moy, Sheila Hyman, Maria Emerita Rosado Nieves, Lorraine Montalvo McGraw, and Marianne Della Sala, and also the assault and kidnap of Karen Schilt, Susan Geiger, and Leslie Ann Odell. And again, probably many, many more women, some of whom we will never know.
Yeah. I mean, especially because at one point he started killing like 2 women in one night, or at least like in having them in one room. And like the fact that he was like, no one ever questioned me, so I just kept doing it. And it's like, God, who knows what else he's responsible for.
And not all of them. Obviously, like there were some just like young teenage girls, like hitchhiking, just out walking, living their lives, whatever. But a lot of them were sex workers. So again, in the 60s, I'm sure they were not, police were not actively working their missing persons cases as they would someone else, or they didn't have anyone to report them missing, and just just so sad.
Yeah.
And I feel like one that's not very well known. Like I don't feel like Richard Cottingham, like this is the same time as Bundy, and I feel like his name is not well known at all.
And he's still confessing.
Yeah,
So
like
it's like,
there's
yeah,
still
how
updates
are
this year.
people, yeah, like how are people not talking about this more? I cannot wait to ask my father-in-law about this at Christmas.
Oh yes, tell me everything he knows.
Yeah, I'll give you an update if I get any uh juicy gossip. I doubt I will, but
Yes, you know,
I think
you
he would have
never
been
know.
very young at this time
Yeah.
because he was born, I think, 63. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I guess he maybe remembers the trials or something like in
Yeah,
the
like maybe
80s,
heard
but
about it.
yeah.
Yeah, but just wild and wild that he's not well known. And again, you wonder if it's because of the victims that he chose. But also, I mean, there's 13,
Green
15-year-old
River
girls.
Killer. I mean, we talk
Yeah,
about him and he targeted sex workers. So why are we not talking about Richard Cottingham? I mean,
yeah,
not that we should talk about Richard Cottingham. We should talk about his victims, but you get what I'm
exactly.
saying.
Yeah, exactly. So Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is, guys, I did it. I finally read Fourth Wing, like all the book talk has
Oh,
been telling me to do. And I really enjoyed it. I did. I really like it.
Good.
And I timed it out perfectly where I finished it and can start the next book.
Beautiful when that happens.
I'm a little scared of it. I haven't seen any spoilers, but I've just seen people like at the end of the book being like, oh, and I'm just
Uh-huh.
so scared. And I don't know if I'm
Oh
in a
no.
place where I can handle it. I mean, I'll handle it, but it's a book. It's
Hmm.
not real. It's not real, Courtney. It's not real. But you know how it
I don't
gets.
know if I
Like,
can handle it, as we've just told you an hour story of so
I
many
know.
women being brutally murdered. That's why we can't handle the sad books, okay? Because we
Yeah,
do this.
I know. Literally, basically. Um, yeah, so I'm like a fourth of the way through that of Iron
Hmm.
Flame. So if you have read Fourth Wing, definitely message me and let's talk about it. Don't give any Iron Flame spoilers yet. I'm hoping by the time this comes out, I will have finished it, but
Hmm.
no promises. I have family coming into town this weekend, so
Yeah.
no promises this almost 700-page book will be finished by then. But yeah, so that is my perk of the week is I did really enjoy it. It was really good.
Nice.
I am very excited for the second one, and then I hate the fact that I'm gonna have to wait God knows how long for the third one, but
Hmm.
really, really excited, and I'll just be grateful I'm reading it for now. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, that is my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
Okay, so I feel like I do this every week where I have a side story to say based on Courtney's perk of the week. But just want to say, speaking of book talk, have you seen Steph Reads a Lot?
It sounds familiar.
Okay, so she does like the silent book reviews. They're so funny. So she'll basically like just pull up her stack of books and then like she'll show them to you and then she'll just like either make facial expressions or like, do different so like she'll like
Yeah.
put one that she hates and she'll just sit there and she'll just stare at the screen and then she just like punches it off screen and then she'll like put up another one and then she's like so happy or like pretending to cry
Yeah.
and like she'll like do that for like all it's just really funny to
I
watch.
love that because I love looking at like book reviews, but sometimes people just talk way too much
Yes.
about it. And I'm like,
Yes.
look, I am in the day and age of technology. I got a short attention span. I'm gonna
Like
need you
yes or
to,
no. Get a move on. Yeah.
yeah.
Check her out. I think you'll like her a lot. But
Her
her
name
husband
sounds
also
familiar.
you may have seen her. Her husband also got her for her birthday or something a like book stamp, and it's like from like the personal library of Steph Reads a Lot, and it's
Hmm.
so cute. And I was like, I love that idea. And we've talked all the time about how we need to like get stamps for our books because we can never remember who owns which
Hmm.
book. And I was like, that's so cute. We should do that. Anyway,
Yes.
that's my little side story. My perk of the week. I just want to give a shout out to my favorite local coffee shop. So it's called Cultivate here in Knoxville. It's also like a flower shop, which is cute because it's like you can get your coffee and also a bouquet of flowers. But I just love them so much. And they have like their
Hmm.
fall menu right now. They'll have their like holiday Christmassy drinks coming out soon. But like everything from there is perfection. Like it's always so good and they're so quick. Like we'll like go there and we drive into my aunt's house and there's like 20 people at Starbucks and I'm like, I just got my latte in like 5 minutes. And they're
Yeah.
so fucking nice. Like over the top nice, but it's just delightful. Anyway, I
Yeah.
just very much love them and their coffee.
Yeah. A good coffee shop is always great.
Yeah, that is my perk of the week. You guys know where to find us on all the places. It is in the show notes. Like Courtney said in the beginning of this episode, which was a while ago now, send any updates our way. If you guys see them out and about in the world, just DM them over to us so we can include them on the next episode. We'll have to keep an eye out for Richard Cottingham and any new confessions before he dies, which hopefully will be soon because he's a sick old man in all terms of the word. So, but hopefully he will be able to bring some sort of closure to other families before he does die.
And
Yeah,
our favorite platform is patreon.com/caffeinated crimes, where next week we'll be doing our like book club book review of The Devil in the White City. Well, I guess technically this week, like in 2 days. No, I was right. Nick, there is a fifth Thursday in November.
yes.
So it will be coming out next week at the time you hear this episode of our book club book review of Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. And also, in addition to that bonus, we have 30 something other bonuses on there. Certain like levels, you can get a pin and sticker, Discord access, ad-free episodes. I mean, we just have so many perks over there. It's unreal. And if you have any perks that are within reason that you're like, I would join up if you had blank, again, within reason, nothing weird.
If you give us $1 million, I will join your Patreon.
Yeah. If you post your boobs, we'll join your Patreon. I'm not doing that. So
I love how our minds went in two completely different directions.
Yeah. I was thinking like, please don't be weird like that. But if there's just something like within reason that you were like, if you had this perk, I would definitely join because that would be worth it for me. Let us know. And if it's, something we could work into the Patreon, then we'll definitely do it.
Yeah.
But if you can't do that, if you could give us a review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, that is free to do, to give us 5 stars and give us a nice little comment. It makes us smile. If you want to subscribe to our YouTube, give it a like, put a nice comment, just message us in any form, just saying nice things. We really appreciate it. But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.